The morning mist clung to the rolling hills surrounding Pine Valley Shooting Complex as competitors began arriving for the annual Western States Precision Championship. Pickup trucks kicked up dust clouds along the gravel road, their beds loaded with custom rifle cases, spotting scopes, and enough ammunition to stock a small armory. This wasn't just any competition. It was the kind of event that separated weekend shooters from true marksmen, where reputations were made and legends were born. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Rodriguez stepped out of his gleaming black Ford Raptor, adjusting his designer shooting vest, adorned with patches from competitions across 3 states. At 35, he'd built his reputation on precision and intimidation in equal measure. His custom-built rifle, worth more than most people's cars, caught the morning light as he lifted it from its foam-lined case. Everything about Marcus screamed serious competitor, from his perfectly maintained gear to his confident swagger as he surveyed the other arrivals. The competition drew the best shooters from across the region. There was Jennifer Walsh, a former Olympic alternate whose technical precision was legendary. David Chen, a retired Navy SEAL whose military background gave him an edge in high-pressure situations. Sarah Kim, a young prodigy who'd been breaking records since she was 16. These weren't hobbyists. They were athletes who dedicated years to perfecting their craft. The registration tent buzzed with the familiar energy of serious competitors sizing each other up. Conversations revolved around barrel harmonics, wind compensation, and ammunition specifications. Every detail mattered when victory could be decided by fractions of an inch at distances that would challenge the human eye's ability to even see the targets clearly. That's when Maya Chen walked up to the registration table. She moved with the unhurried pace of someone who had nowhere urgent to be, her worn hiking boots making soft sounds against the packed earth. Her clothes were practical but unremarkable: faded jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket that had seen better days. She carried what appeared to be a gun case, though it was smaller than what most competitors brought, and showed signs of considerable use. The registration volunteer, a cheerful woman named Linda Peterson who'd been running these events for over a decade, looked up with a professional smile. "Good morning. First time at Pine Valley." "Yes, ma'am," Maya replied, her voice carrying a slight accent that Linda couldn't quite place. "I'd like to register for the precision rifle competition." Linda handed her the standard paperwork. "Wonderful. What's your competitive background? Any previous rankings we should know about?" Maya shook her head as she began filling out the forms. "Nothing official. Just enjoy shooting." This caught the attention of Marcus Rodriguez, who was reviewing the target configurations posted on a nearby board. He glanced over at the newcomer, taking in her casual appearance and modest gear. In a sport where equipment could cost tens of thousands of dollars, and competitors often spent more on a single rifle scope than Maya appeared to have spent on her entire outfit, she stood out for all the wrong reasons. "First time competing?" Marcus asked, his tone carrying just enough friendliness to mask the condescension underneath. "The precision rifle division is pretty intense. Lots of experienced shooters here today." Maya looked up from her paperwork, offering a polite smile. "I imagine so. Should be interesting." Jennifer Walsh, who'd been adjusting her competition gear nearby, couldn't help but overhear. She'd seen plenty of newcomers over the years, and experience had taught her to recognize the signs of someone who might be in over their head. "The course today includes shots out to 800 yards, she said, not unkindly. "Wind conditions can be tricky for anyone who's not used to long-range work." "I appreciate the heads up," Maya replied, continuing to work on her registration forms. David Chen, never one to pass up an opportunity to share his expertise, joined the growing circle of attention around the registration table. "Equipment makes a huge difference at these distances," he said, gesturing toward his own impressive setup. "What kind of rifle are you shooting?" Maya glanced toward her case. "Just something I've had for a while." "Works well enough." The vague answer raised eyebrows among the gathered competitors. In a community where people could spend hours discussing the technical specifications of their equipment, Maya's reluctance to elaborate was unusual. Most shooters were eager to talk about their gear, sharing details about custom barrels, precision-tuned triggers, and specialized ammunition loads. Sarah Kim, despite her young age, had learned to read people through years of competition. Something about Maya's demeanor intrigued her. While the other competitors were engaging in the typical pre-competition posturing, Maya seemed genuinely uninterested in the social dynamics playing out around her. She appeared focused on something else entirely, though Sarah couldn't quite figure out what. "Where are you from?" Sarah asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Been moving around quite a bit," Maya answered, handing her completed paperwork back to Linda. "Settled in the area recently." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jake Morrison, the competition director, and a man whose reputation in precision shooting circles was built on decades of experience. At 58, Jake had seen every type of competitor imaginable, from nervous newcomers to arrogant professionals. His weathered face and patient demeanor had earned him respect throughout the shooting community. "Morning, folks," Jake said, reviewing the registration list. "Looks like we've got 32 competitors today. Should be a great event." His eyes scanned the list, pausing at Maya's entry. "Maya Chen, welcome to Pine Valley. Any questions about today's format?" "I think I've got it figured out," Maya said. "Multiple distances, moving targets for the final stage?" Jake nodded approvingly. "That's right. We start with stationary targets at 200, 400, and 600 yards. Top 15 scores advance to the moving target challenge. Those are reactive targets at various distances, some predictable patterns, some random. It's what separates the really skilled shooters from everyone else." Marcus couldn't resist interjecting. "The moving targets are where experience really shows. Takes years to develop the kind of instinctive shooting that stage requires." Maya nodded politely but didn't respond to the implicit challenge in his words. Instead, she thanked Jake and began walking toward the staging area where competitors could set up their equipment and prepare for the day's events. As she walked away, the group of established competitors continued their conversation, but the tone had shifted. There was something about Maya that didn't quite fit their expectations. And in a sport where reading your competition was part of the mental game, the uncertainty was noticeable. "Sweet kid," Jennifer said, "but she's going to get humbled pretty quickly out there." David nodded in agreement. "I give her credit for trying, but this isn't a beginner-friendly event. Some of these targets challenge even experienced shooters." Marcus was less charitable in his assessment. "Probably saw some YouTube videos and thought it looked easy. Reality's going to hit pretty hard when she realizes what 800-yard precision actually requires." Sarah Kim remained quiet, but something about the interaction bothered her. Maya's responses had been polite but evasive, and her demeanor suggested someone with more experience than her appearance indicated. Still, Sarah kept her observations to herself. In competitive shooting, overconfidence could be as dangerous as underestimation. The staging area resembled a temporary city of precision equipment. Competitors had claimed spots along covered benches, unpacking rifle cases and setting up spotting scopes with the methodical care of surgeons preparing for complex operations. The air hummed with the sound of rifle bolts being cycled, ammunition being sorted, and wind flags being adjusted. Maya found an unclaimed section of bench toward the end of the line, away from the main clusters of competitors. She set down her case and began her own preparation ritual, though it looked markedly different from the elaborate setups surrounding her. Her case, when opened, revealed a rifle that drew puzzled looks from anyone who happened to glance in her direction. While the other competitors had brought custom-built precision instruments with specialized stocks, match-grade barrels, and optics that cost more than most people's monthly salary, Maya's rifle appeared almost antique by comparison. It was a classic hunting rifle, probably manufactured decades ago, with a scope that looked like something from a sporting goods store rather than a precision shooting supplier. The wood stock showed honest wear, and the metal surfaces had the patina that came from years of actual use rather than careful preservation. Everything about it suggested a working rifle rather than a competition instrument. Tom Bradley, a machinist who competed regularly and took pride in his technical knowledge, couldn't help but stare as Maya assembled her equipment. "Is that a Model 70? He asked, genuine curiosity overcoming his usual reserve. "Similar action," Maya replied, checking the rifle's function with practice movements. "Had some work done on it over the years." Tom examined the rifle more closely, noting details that weren't immediately obvious. The trigger had been modified, though subtly. The barrel showed signs of professional work, despite its aged appearance. The scope, while not a premium brand, had been mounted with unusual precision. Someone had clearly spent time making this rifle work better than its humble origins would suggest. Custom trigger work? Tom asked, his professional interest overriding social conventions. Maya nodded. Among other things, it shoots where I point it. The simple confidence in her statement struck Tom as interesting. Most competitors would have launched into detailed explanations of their rifle's specifications, discussing grain weights, barrel harmonics, and precision measurements. Maya's matter-of-fact response suggested someone who cared more about results than technical discussions. As the morning progressed and competitors continued their preparations, Maya's presence became a source of ongoing curiosity and amusement. Her equipment looked increasingly out of place as more precision rifles were unpacked around her. The contrast was striking, thousands of dollars worth of cutting-edge technology surrounding a rifle that appeared to belong in a different era entirely. The reaction wasn't lost on Maya, but she seemed genuinely unbothered by the attention. She went about her preparation with the methodical efficiency of someone following a well-established routine. Ammunition was sorted and counted. The rifle's scope was adjusted and checked. Wind conditions were noted and considered. Every action suggested competence, even if the equipment didn't match the setting. Marcus Rodriguez found himself increasingly irritated by Maya's presence. Competition shooting was serious business, and he'd worked hard to earn his position among the sport's elite performers. The idea that someone could walk in off the street with outdated equipment and expect to compete alongside dedicated athletes struck him as disrespectful to everyone who'd invested years in developing their skills. "This isn't a costume party," he muttered to David Chen, loud enough for Maya to overhear. "Some of us actually take this sport seriously." David, while agreeing with the sentiment, was more diplomatic in his approach. "Everyone starts somewhere," he said, though his tone suggested he didn't expect Maya to finish anywhere near the top of the field. Jennifer Walsh had been watching the dynamics unfold with the detached interest of someone who'd seen similar situations play out many times before. Newcomers often underestimated the difficulty of precision shooting, and the learning curve could be brutal. Still, she appreciated anyone willing to challenge themselves, even if the outcome was likely to be educational rather than successful. "First stage starts in 20 minutes, Jake Morrison announced over the public address system. "Shooters to the 200-yard line for equipment inspection and safety briefing." The competitors began gathering their gear and moving toward the designated area. Maya packed her equipment with the same methodical efficiency she displayed throughout the morning, slinging her rifle and joining the migration of shooters toward the firing line. The inspection process was routine but thorough. Range safety officers checked each rifle to ensure it met competition standards and was in safe operating condition. They examined ammunition to verify it fell within acceptable parameters. Scope adjustments were noted to prevent any potential disputes during scoring. When Maya's turn came, the safety officer, a retired police marksman named Bill Patterson, examined her rifle with professional interest. Despite its aged appearance, the weapon was clearly well-maintained and properly configured for the competition. The trigger pull met specifications, the scope was properly mounted, and the ammunition was within acceptable limits. "Interesting rifle," Bill commented, handing it back to Maya. "Don't see many like this in competition anymore." "It's reliable," Maya said simply, accepting the rifle and moving toward her assigned firing position. The 200-yard targets were standard competition bullseyes, precisely marked and clearly visible through quality optics. For experienced shooters, this distance represented a warm-up, an opportunity to settle into their rhythm and confirm their equipment was performing as expected. The real challenges would come later, as distances increased and environmental factors became more significant. Maya found herself assigned to firing point 12, positioned between a nervous-looking newcomer named Pete Williams and an experienced competitor named Carol Martinez who'd been shooting precision matches for over 15 years. The contrast in equipment was immediately apparent. Carol's rifle represented the latest in precision technology, while Pete had brought gear that, while adequate, clearly marked him as someone still learning the sport's requirements. "First time here?" Carol asked Maya, making conversation while adjusting her shooting mat and support equipment. "First time at this range," Maya replied, setting up her own position with economical movements that suggested familiarity with the process. Pete, clearly nervous about his own first competition experience, found some comfort in the presence of other newcomers. "I've been practicing for months," he said, more to himself than anyone else. 200 yards should be manageable, right? Maya glanced over at the young man's anxious face. "Just focus on your fundamentals," she said gently. "Breathing, trigger control, follow through. The distance doesn't change what you need to do." The advice was sound, delivered with a matter-of-fact confidence that made Pete feel somewhat better about his chances. Carol, overhearing the exchange, noted that Maya's advice demonstrated a solid understanding of precision shooting principles, even if her equipment suggested otherwise. Jake Morrison's voice carried clearly over the firing line. "Shooters, you have 20 minutes to fire 15 shots for record. Sighting shots are permitted within the time limit. Questions?" When none were forthcoming, he continued, "Load and make ready." The transformation that occurred along the firing line was immediate and dramatic. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Conversations stopped. Casual attitudes disappeared, and 32 competitors settled into the focused mental state that precision shooting demanded. This was where preparation met execution, where hours of practice either paid off or revealed their inadequacy. Maya's approach to the firing line differed subtly from most of her fellow competitors. While others were making final adjustments to their equipment and taking careful sighting shots, she seemed to settle into position with minimal fuss. Her shooting stance was textbook perfect, stable, comfortable, and naturally aligned with the target. The rifle came to her shoulder as if it belonged there, and her cheek weld was consistent and automatic. Her first shot broke cleanly, the sound of the rifle barely audible over the general noise of 32 firearms being fired in sequence. Through her spotting scope, Carol Martinez watched Maya's target and was surprised to see the bullet hole appear in the 10 ring, just slightly off-center. A lucky first shot, she thought, but good shooting nonetheless. Maya's second shot landed even closer to center, and her third was nearly perfect. By the fifth shot, Carol was paying serious attention to her neighbor's performance. This wasn't beginner's luck or random chance. Maya was shooting with the kind of consistency that came from serious experience, even if her equipment suggested otherwise. The rhythm Maya established was different from most competitors. While others took considerable time between shots, carefully calculating wind conditions and making scope adjustments, Maya seemed to fire at a steady, almost mechanical pace. Each shot was deliberate, but not rushed, confident, but not careless. Her follow-through was textbook perfect, and she never seemed to lose her natural point of aim. Pete Williams, struggling with his own target and increasingly frustrated by his inconsistent performance, couldn't help but notice Maya's apparent success. Between shots, he glanced over at her setup, trying to understand how someone with such basic equipment could be performing so well while he struggled with his much more expensive gear. "Time remaining, 5 minutes, Jake announced. Maya had fired 12 shots and was settling in for her 13th when a sudden gust of wind swept across the range, strong enough to flutter the target frames and send dust devils dancing between the firing positions. Most shooters paused, waiting for the wind to settle or making significant adjustments to compensate for the changed conditions. Maya barely hesitated. She observed the wind flags for a moment, made a subtle adjustment to her point of aim, and fired. The shot landed dead center, a perfect bullseye that would have been impressive under calm conditions and was remarkable given the challenging wind. Her final 2 shots maintained the same standard, each one placed with precision that drew increasingly amazed looks from nearby competitors. When the ceasefire command was given, Maya unloaded her rifle and stood up from her shooting position, appearing no more excited or stressed than when she'd started. The target scoring process revealed what many had already suspected from watching Maya's performance. Her target showed 15 shots grouped tightly around the center of the bullseye, with several scoring perfect 10s and the rest falling within the 9 ring. It was the kind of shooting that experienced competitors respected and novices could barely comprehend. Carol Martinez, whose own excellent shooting had earned her a respectable score, found herself genuinely impressed. "That's some fine shooting," she said to Maya as they waited for official scores to be posted. "Especially with that wind gust toward the end." "Wind's just another factor to consider," Maya replied, beginning to clean her rifle with practiced efficiency. "Nothing changes the fundamentals." The casual way she dismissed what others considered a challenging shooting condition struck Carol as significant. Maya was either extremely confident or had experience dealing with much more difficult environmental factors than a typical shooting range provided. Marcus Rodriguez, whose own performance had been excellent but not exceptional, found himself increasingly annoyed by Maya's apparent success. He'd spent years perfecting his technique and investing in the best equipment money could buy. The idea that someone with a decades-old rifle could outshoot him was both embarrassing and infuriating. "Beginner's luck," he said to David Chen, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced of his own assessment. "Wait until the distances increase and the real challenges start." But David, whose military background had taught him to recognize competence regardless of its packaging, wasn't so quick to dismiss Maya's performance. Her shooting had displayed technical proficiency that couldn't be attributed to chance or good fortune. Someone had taught her well, and she'd clearly spent considerable time developing her skills. When the official scores were posted, Maya's name appeared in third place overall, behind only Jennifer Walsh, the former Olympic alternate, and David Chen himself. The ranking sent a ripple of surprise through the gathered competitors, many of whom had expected the newcomer with the old rifle to struggle significantly. Jake Morrison reviewed the scores with the satisfaction of someone who'd witnessed exceptional marksmanship. "Outstanding shooting across the board," he announced. "Top 15 advanced to the 400-yard stage. Everyone else, thank you for participating, and we hope to see you at future events." As competitors who hadn't qualified began packing their equipment, those moving forward prepared for the increased challenge of longer-distance shooting. The 400-yard targets would test skills that the shorter distance had only hinted at, and environmental factors would become increasingly significant. Maya's continued presence among the advancing competitors was no longer a source of amusement for those who had initially dismissed her. Her third-place finish had been too decisive to ignore, and her shooting had displayed technical competence that demanded respect. Still, many believed that longer distances would reveal limitations in both her equipment and experience. The 400-yard firing line represented a significant step up in difficulty. At twice the distance, small errors in technique or equipment became magnified, and environmental factors like wind and mirage could turn a perfect shot into a disappointing miss. The targets themselves appeared smaller and more challenging, testing the limits of both human vision and mechanical precision. Maya's approach to the increased challenge remained consistent with her earlier performance. She made minimal adjustments to her equipment, checked wind conditions with practiced efficiency, and settled into her firing position with the same methodical confidence she'd displayed at 200 yards. The other advancing competitors, now taking her seriously as a threat, paid closer attention to her technique and equipment setup. What they observed was increasingly puzzling. Maya's rifle scope, while adequate, wasn't the high-magnification precision instrument most competitors relied on at extended ranges. Her shooting position was textbook correct, but nothing fancy. Even her ammunition appeared to be standard hunting rounds, rather than the carefully crafted match-grade cartridges most precision shooters preferred. Yet when the shooting began, Maya's performance remained remarkably consistent. Her shots continued to find the center of the target with mechanical precision, and her rhythm never varied despite the increased difficulty. If anything, she seemed more comfortable at the longer distance, as if the additional challenge brought out something in her shooting that hadn't been fully evident at closer ranges. Carol Martinez, whose own shooting remained excellent, found herself studying Maya's technique between strings of fire. What she observed contradicted much of what she'd learned about precision shooting over her years of competition. Maya's equipment was basic, her setup was simple, yet her results were undeniably superior to shooters with far more sophisticated gear. "How long have you been shooting?" Carol asked during a break between firing strings. Maya considered the question for a moment. "Started when I was pretty young," she said. "Had good teachers." The non-specific answer was typical of Maya's responses throughout the day, but Carol detected something in her tone that suggested the story was more complex than the simple words indicated. Good teachers could mean many things, and Maya's reluctance to elaborate suggested there might be experiences she preferred not to discuss. Jennifer Walsh, the former Olympic alternate whose own shooting had been characteristically excellent, was beginning to reassess her initial impression of Maya. Olympic-level competition had taught Jennifer to recognize different types of shooting expertise, and Maya's performance suggested training that went beyond typical sporting applications. There was something about Maya's shooting rhythm, her apparent comfort with challenging conditions, and her ability to maintain precision under pressure that reminded Jennifer of shooters she'd encountered during her brief exposure to military marksmanship programs. The thought was speculative, but it would explain much about Maya's unusual combination of basic equipment and advanced capability. As the 400-yard stage concluded, Maya's position on the leaderboard had improved to second place, trailing only Chen by a narrow margin. Her consistent precision had proven that her earlier performance wasn't a fluke, and the gap between her scores and those of supposedly more experienced competitors was becoming increasingly significant. Marcus Rodriguez found himself in the unfamiliar and uncomfortable position of trailing someone he'd dismissed as a rank amateur just hours earlier. His own shooting had been technically sound but lacked the mechanical consistency that Maya displayed. More troubling was the realization that his expensive equipment and years of competitive experience weren't providing the advantage he'd expected. The 600-yard stage would represent the final test before the moving target challenge that separated true precision shooters from those who merely possessed good equipment and adequate training. At this distance, even minor equipment deficiencies would become apparent, and shooting technique would be tested to its limits. Maya's preparation for the extended-range shooting remained as straightforward as it had been throughout the day. While other competitors made significant adjustments to their equipment and spent considerable time calculating environmental factors, Maya's approach appeared almost intuitive. She observed conditions, made subtle adjustments, and settled into her shooting position with confidence that suggested extensive experience at such ranges. When the shooting began, Maya's performance reached a level that captured the attention of every competitor and range official present. Her shots continued to cluster around the center of the distant target, with precision that challenged the capabilities of her supposedly inadequate equipment. Each bullet seemed to find its intended mark, regardless of wind conditions or other environmental factors that were causing problems for other shooters. By the time the 600-yard stage was completed, Maya had moved into first place overall, and the margin wasn't close. Her shooting had been so consistently excellent that other competitors were left wondering how someone with her equipment could achieve such results. The questions that had begun as casual curiosity were becoming serious inquiries about her background and experience. Jake Morrison, whose decades of experience in precision shooting had taught him to recognize exceptional marksmanship when he saw it, found himself genuinely impressed by Maya's performance. Her shooting displayed technical proficiency that rivaled anything he'd witnessed in competition, and her apparent comfort with challenging conditions suggested training that went well beyond typical sporting applications. "Outstanding shooting today," he said to Maya as scores were being calculated. "That's some of the best precision work I've seen at this range." "Thank you," Maya replied, beginning her routine equipment cleaning. "Good course of fire. Well-organized event." Jake noted that Maya accepted the compliment graciously, but without the enthusiasm most shooters would display after such exceptional performance. Her demeanor suggested someone for whom excellent marksmanship was expected rather than surprising, which raised additional questions about her background and training. The final 15 competitors who would advance to the moving target challenge represented the best shooters present, but Maya's commanding lead meant that the others would be shooting for second place unless something dramatic occurred during the final stage. The moving target portion of the competition had historically separated good shooters from exceptional ones, but Maya's consistent excellence throughout the day suggested she might be in a category of her own. As the competitors prepared for the final challenge, the atmosphere among the gathered shooters had completely changed from the morning's casual dismissal of the newcomer with the old rifle. Maya had earned not just respect, but genuine curiosity about her background and the source of her remarkable shooting ability. The moving target stage at Pine Valley was legendary among precision shooting enthusiasts. 25 reactive targets positioned at various distances from 300 to 700 yards would present themselves according to a computer-controlled sequence that mixed predictable patterns with random appearances. Shooters would have 90 seconds to engage as many targets as possible, with scoring based on both accuracy and the number of successful hits. The challenge was designed to test instinctive shooting ability, target acquisition speed, and the kind of fluid precision that couldn't be achieved through careful calculation and deliberate aim. It separated shooters who could perform well under controlled conditions from those who could maintain accuracy while adapting quickly to changing circumstances. Maya studied the target array through her binoculars, noting the positions and likely sequence patterns with the same methodical attention she'd applied to every other aspect of the competition. Her analysis was thorough but efficient, suggesting someone accustomed to quickly assessing complex tactical situations. Marcus Rodriguez, desperate to salvage something from what had become an increasingly humbling day, approached Maya with what he intended as psychological warfare disguised as helpful advice. "The moving targets are where this competition really gets decided," he said, his tone carrying implications that her earlier success might not translate to this more demanding challenge. "Should be interesting," Maya replied, continuing her study of the target arrangements without appearing concerned by his comments. The dismissive calm of her response frustrated Marcus further. Throughout the day, Maya had remained unaffected by the skepticism, condescension, and eventual grudging respect of her fellow competitors. Her focus never wavered, her confidence never faltered, and her shooting never deteriorated under pressure. David Chen, whose military background gave him insight into different types of marksmanship training, had been watching Maya throughout the day with growing recognition. Her shooting stance, target engagement rhythm, and apparent comfort with challenging conditions all suggested exposure to training that went beyond civilian sporting applications. The moving target stage would likely confirm his suspicions about her background. As the final stage began, Maya took her position at the firing line with the same methodical precision she'd displayed throughout the competition. Her rifle came to her shoulder naturally, her breathing settled into the controlled rhythm of someone completely comfortable with the weapon in her hands, and her focus narrowed to the task ahead. Jake Morrison's voice carried clearly over the range. "Shooter ready? Targets will begin appearing in 5 seconds. You have 90 seconds from the first target activation. Good luck." The first target, a steel plate at 400 yards, swung into view with mechanical precision. Maya's response was immediate and fluid. Target acquired, rifle aligned, shot fired, target hit. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds, and the distinctive ring of bullet meeting steel confirmed a successful engagement. The second target appeared at 300 yards, positioned to test the shooter's ability to quickly shift between different ranges. Maya's adjustment was seamless, her rifle tracking to the new position as if guided by instinct rather than conscious thought. Another hit, another metallic ring confirming her accuracy. What followed was a display of shooting that left spectators and competitors alike struggling to comprehend what they were witnessing. Target after target appeared at varying distances and positions, each one presenting for only a brief window of opportunity. Maya engaged each one with fluid precision, her rifle seeming to move of its own accord to find each new challenge. There was no hesitation, no visible process of calculation or adjustment. Maya appeared to operate on pure instinct, reading the target presentations and responding with mechanical precision that suggested thousands of hours of similar training. Her shooting rhythm was hypnotic. Target acquisition, alignment, shot, hit, transition to the next challenge. By the 30-second mark, Maya had successfully engaged 12 targets, a pace that exceeded anything the other competitors had managed. Her accuracy remained perfect, each shot finding its mark despite the speed of her engagements and the varying distances involved. Carol Martinez, who was scheduled to shoot next, found herself studying Maya's technique with professional fascination. What she was witnessing defied conventional understanding of precision shooting. Maya's equipment was basic, her setup was simple, yet her performance suggested capabilities that belonged in a different category entirely. The targets continued to appear according to their program sequence, and Maya continued to engage them with unwavering accuracy. Distant targets, close targets, targets that appeared for only seconds before disappearing. Each one met with the same fluid precision that had characterized her shooting throughout the competition. At the 60-second mark, Maya had successfully engaged 21 targets without a single miss. The gathered spectators, initially drawn by curiosity about the newcomer's unusual equipment, were now witnessing something that transcended typical competitive shooting. This was marksmanship at a level that few had ever seen in person. The final targets in the sequence were positioned at maximum range and programmed to appear for minimal exposure time, designed to challenge even the most skilled shooters. Maya engaged each one with the same mechanical precision she'd maintained throughout the stage, her rifle tracking smoothly between positions and her shots breaking at exactly the right moment. When the final target fell with a metallic clang that echoed across the range, Maya had achieved something that had never been accomplished in the history of the Pine Valley Moving Target Challenge. 25 targets engaged, 25 hits recorded, not a single miss in the entire sequence. The silence that followed the ceasefire command was complete and profound. Competitors, range officials, and spectators struggled to process what they'd just witnessed. Maya calmly unloaded her rifle, engaged the safety, and stepped back from the firing line as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Jake Morrison, whose experience with precision shooting spanned 4 decades, found himself temporarily speechless. In all his years of organizing competitions and witnessing exceptional marksmanship, he'd never seen anything comparable to Maya's performance. 25 of 25 targets, many at extended ranges, all engaged within the time limit. It was shooting that belonged in the realm of legend rather than reality. "Perfect score," he announced finally, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and respect. 25 targets, 25 hits. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the first perfect score in the 15-year history of this event. The applause that followed was genuine and prolonged, coming from competitors who understood exactly how difficult Maya's achievement had been. This wasn't luck or good fortune. It was skill at a level that demanded recognition regardless of personal rivalries or competitive disappointments. Maya accepted the congratulations graciously, but without fanfare, beginning her post-shooting routine of cleaning and securing her equipment. Her demeanor remained calm and professional, as if perfect scores in challenging competitions were routine rather than remarkable achievements. Marcus Rodriguez found himself in the humbling position of congratulating someone he'd dismissed and mocked just hours earlier. "That was incredible shooting," he said, and the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. "I've never seen anything like it." "Thank you," Maya replied simply, continuing to clean her rifle with practiced efficiency. "Good competition. Well-organized event." David Chen approached with questions he could no longer contain. Maya's shooting had confirmed his suspicions about her background, and her performance demanded explanation. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked directly. Maya paused in her cleaning, considering her response. "Had some good instructors over the years," she said finally. "Learned from people who knew what they were doing." The answer was characteristically vague, but David's military experience gave him insight into what Maya's reluctance to elaborate might indicate. Some shooting training occurred in contexts that people preferred not to discuss in detail, and some instructors taught skills that went well beyond sporting applications. Jennifer Walsh, whose Olympic-level experience gave her unique perspective on exceptional marksmanship, found herself genuinely curious about Maya's background. The shooting she'd witnessed suggested training and experience that belonged in elite military or law enforcement programs, rather than civilian sporting contexts. "That rifle," Jennifer said, gesturing toward Maya's well-worn weapon. "It's not exactly what most people would choose for precision competition." Maya looked up from her cleaning, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "It's reliable," she said. "Does what I need it to do." The simple statement carried implications that weren't lost on the more experienced shooters present. Reliability over appearance, function over form, results over reputation. Maya's equipment choices suggested someone whose priorities had been shaped by circumstances where performance was more important than impression. As word of Maya's perfect score spread throughout the shooting complex, competitors who hadn't advanced to the final stage began gathering to hear details of her unprecedented achievement. The story of the newcomer with the old rifle who'd outshot some of the region's best marksmen was already taking on legendary proportions. Tom Bradley, the machinist who'd noticed the subtle modifications to Maya's rifle, found himself reconsidering his initial assessment of her equipment. What had appeared to be basic hunting rifle was clearly something more sophisticated, modified by someone who understood the relationship between mechanical precision and shooting performance. "That trigger work," he said to Maya as she prepared to leave. "Who did the modifications?" Maya's hands stilled on her rifle case. "Someone who knew what they were doing," she said after a moment. "Someone who understood what mattered." The past tense of her statement and the subtle change in her tone suggested a story that might involve loss or separation. But Tom didn't pursue the matter further. Some subjects were clearly private, and Maya had already shared more than enough through her exceptional shooting performance. Jake Morrison approached with a ceremonial trophy that recognized Maya's achievement, a beautiful piece that would commemorate the first perfect score in the event's history. "This belongs to you," he said formally. "Outstanding shooting, and a performance that will be remembered for years to come." Maya accepted the trophy with gracious professionalism, though she seemed more interested in the quality of the competition than the recognition her performance had earned. "Good event," she said. "Well-run competition. Thank you for the opportunity." As the official ceremonies concluded and competitors began packing their equipment for departure, Maya's presence had fundamentally changed the dynamic of the entire event. She'd arrived as a curiosity, someone whose basic equipment and unknown background made her an easy target for dismissal and condescension. She was leaving as the undisputed champion, having achieved something that none of the supposedly more qualified competitors. The aftermath of Maya's unprecedented performance created ripples that extended far beyond the immediate circle of competitors at Pine Valley. As word spread through the regional shooting community, her perfect score became the subject of intense speculation and debate. Forums buzzed with theories about her background, her training, and the source of her remarkable abilities. Dr. Michael Harrison, a ballistics expert and competitive shooter who served as a technical consultant for several precision rifle manufacturers, had observed the final stages of the competition from the sidelines. His professional interest had been piqued by reports of exceptional shooting, but what he witnessed exceeded his expectations entirely. Harrison approached Maya as she prepared to load her equipment into a modest sedan that looked as unremarkable as her rifle had that morning. "Excuse me, Ms. Chen," he said, extending his business card. "I'm Dr. Harrison from Advanced Ballistics Research. I'd very much like to discuss your shooting technique and equipment setup." Maya examined the card with polite interest but didn't immediately respond. Harrison's reputation in the shooting world was well established, and his interest in her performance carried implications that went beyond casual curiosity. "What kind of discussion?" Maya asked finally, securing her rifle case in the car's trunk. Harrison chose his words carefully. "Your performance today challenges some fundamental assumptions about the relationship between equipment sophistication and shooting precision. From a technical standpoint, what you've accomplished should be extremely difficult with your rifle and scope combination." Maya closed the trunk and turned to face Harrison directly. "The rifle shoots where I point it," she said simply. "That's all that matters." The statement was characteristic of Maya's approach throughout the day, but Harrison's expertise allowed him to appreciate the complexity hidden behind her apparent simplicity. Achieving that level of mechanical precision with basic equipment required not just exceptional skill, but deep understanding of ballistics, environmental factors, and rifle performance characteristics. "Have you ever considered technical consulting work?" Harrison asked. "There are military and law enforcement applications where your level of precision could be extremely valuable." The question seemed to strike something in Maya, though her expression remained carefully neutral. "I prefer to keep my shooting recreational," she said after a pause that Harrison found significant. Dr. Harrison had worked with enough government contractors and military personnel to recognize the signs of someone with experience they preferred not to discuss. Maya's deflection was polite but firm, and her body language suggested the conversation was approaching topics she considered off-limits. "Of course," Harrison said, backing away from the sensitive subject. "If you ever change your mind, please don't hesitate to contact me. Skills like yours are rare, and there are always organizations looking for that level of capability." Maya nodded politely, got into her car, and drove away without ceremony, leaving behind competitors and officials who were still processing what they'd witnessed. Her departure was as understated as her arrival, though the impact of her performance would continue reverberating through the shooting community for weeks to come. 3 days after the Pine Valley competition, Maya received an unexpected visitor at her small apartment on the outskirts of town. She answered the knock to find a woman in her mid-40s wearing civilian clothes but carrying herself with unmistakable military bearing. "Miss Chen," the woman said, displaying credentials that identified her as Agent Patricia Wells from the Defense Intelligence Agency. "I'd like to speak with you about your performance at the shooting competition this weekend." Maya's reaction was subtle but telling. Her posture shifted slightly, her expression became more guarded, and she took a half-step back from the door. "I'm not sure what there is to discuss," she said carefully. Agent Wells smiled reassuringly. "Nothing official. Nothing that would cause you any trouble. I'm simply curious about someone with your level of marksmanship ability. Mind if I come in?" Maya hesitated, clearly weighing her options before stepping aside to allow the agent into her modest living space. The apartment was spartanly furnished, but impeccably clean, with few personal possessions visible. What decoration existed was functional rather than aesthetic, suggesting someone who moved frequently or maintained minimal attachments to material goods. Wells noticed immediately that there were no photographs displayed, no personal mementos, nothing that would provide insights into Maya's background or relationships. The absence was telling in itself, suggesting someone who valued privacy to an unusual degree. "You don't leave much of a trail," Wells observed, settling into the single chair Maya indicated. No social media presence. Minimal public records. Cash transactions for most purchases. Very thorough operational security for a civilian. The comment made Maya stiffen slightly. "I value my privacy," she said, remaining standing rather than sitting in a position that would make rapid movement difficult. Wells noted the defensive positioning and filed it away as additional evidence supporting her theories about Maya's background. "The shooting you displayed at Pine Valley," she continued, "it's not the kind of skill set typically developed in civilian contexts. The target transitions, the instinctive precision, the comfort with pressure situations, all suggest training that goes beyond sporting applications." Maya remained silent, neither confirming nor denying the implications of Wells's observations. Her stillness was complete and professional, suggesting someone accustomed to interrogation techniques and comfortable with remaining silent until she understood exactly what was being asked and why. "I'm not here to cause problems," Wells said, recognizing Maya's defensive posture. "But when someone with your capabilities surfaces in civilian contexts, certain people take notice. Your shooting suggests training by people who knew what they were doing, in circumstances where precision mattered for reasons beyond competition." The agent's words hung in the air between them, carrying implications that both women understood clearly. Maya's shooting had been too exceptional, too professional, to have been developed purely through sporting activities. Someone with her skills had received training that suggested exposure to military or intelligence contexts. "What do you want?" Maya asked finally, her voice carrying a warning that further probing might not be welcome. Wells reached into her jacket slowly, producing a manila folder that she placed on the small table between them. "I want to offer you an opportunity," she said. "There are situations where someone with your particular skills could be valuable to national security interests." Maya didn't reach for the folder, but her eyes fixed on it with intensity that confirmed Wells's assessment of her background. "I'm not interested in returning to that kind of work," Maya said quietly. The admission was subtle but significant. By referring to returning to such work rather than simply declining involvement, Maya had confirmed that she had indeed been involved in activities that went beyond civilian marksmanship. Wells had her confirmation, but she also understood that pushing too hard might cause Maya to disappear entirely. "No one's asking you to return to anything," Wells said carefully. "But there are consulting opportunities, training positions, technical advisory roles that could use your expertise without requiring operational deployment." Maya finally moved, walking to the window and looking out at the quiet street beyond. Her positioning allowed her to monitor both the conversation and any potential external threats, a habit that Wells recognized from her own operational training. "I've seen what happens when people with my background get pulled back into that world," Maya said without turning around. "Consulting becomes training, training becomes advisory work becomes operational deployment. I'm not interested in that progression." The bitterness in her voice suggested personal experience with exactly the kind of mission creep she was describing. Wells began to understand that Maya's retirement from whatever activities had developed her skills might not have been entirely voluntary, and her reluctance to re-engage might be based on negative experiences rather than simple preference for civilian life. "What happened?" Wells asked gently, abandoning her official interrogation approach in favor of human curiosity. Maya was silent for a long moment, her reflection visible in the window as she considered how much to reveal. "I lost people," she said finally. "Good people, doing important work, who died because someone decided their skills were too valuable to waste on safe assignments." The pain in her voice was genuine and deep, suggesting losses that had fundamentally changed Maya's perspective on service and sacrifice. Wells found herself feeling sympathy for someone who had clearly paid a personal price for whatever contribution she had made to national security. "I'm sorry," Wells said, and meant it. "I've lost friends too. It never gets easier." Maya turned from the window, studying Wells with new attention. "Then you understand why I prefer to keep my shooting recreational," she said. Why I don't want to be pulled back into situations where other people's lives depend on my decisions. Wells nodded, recognizing the psychological burden that came with high-stakes operational work. But you're still training, she observed. Still maintaining skills that go far beyond what civilian competition requires. That suggests you haven't entirely closed the door on service. The observation was perceptive, and Maya's slight flinch indicated that it had struck close to uncomfortable truths. Her exceptional shooting at Pine Valley had indeed suggested someone who maintained operational-level skills despite claiming to be retired from such activities. Old habits, Maya said unconvincingly. Hard to break training that took years to develop. Wells stood to leave, understanding that pushing further would likely be counterproductive. The offer stands, she said, leaving the folder on the table. If you ever change your mind, there are ways to serve that don't involve operational deployment. Teaching, consulting, technical development, all valuable contributions that don't require putting yourself or others at risk. After Wells left, Maya stood alone in her apartment, staring at the folder without opening it. She knew it would contain information about opportunities that would utilize her skills, assignments that would provide purpose and meaning beyond the empty routine her life had become since leaving her previous work. But she also knew that accepting any such opportunity would represent the first step back into a world she'd left, for reasons that remained valid and compelling. The losses she'd referenced to Wells weren't abstract casualties of war, but friends and colleagues whose deaths she carried as personal responsibility. That evening, Maya drove to a secluded area outside town where she'd established a private shooting range on abandoned farmland. The setup was simple but effective. Targets at various distances, environmental challenges that simulated real-world conditions, scenarios that maintained the skills she'd spent years developing. Her practice routine was methodical and comprehensive, covering every aspect of precision marksmanship, from basic fundamentals to advanced techniques. But it was also clearly designed around scenarios that went beyond sporting applications: rapid target acquisition, shooting from unconventional positions, engaging multiple threats under time pressure. As she worked through her training regimen, Maya found herself thinking about Wells's visit and the implications of her newfound visibility in the shooting community. Her performance at Pine Valley had been intended as nothing more than recreational activity, a chance to test her skills in competitive settings while maintaining the anonymity she'd carefully cultivated since leaving her previous life. But exceptional performance in any field drew attention, and attention led to questions she preferred not to answer. The shooting community was small and interconnected, and word of her abilities would inevitably reach people who understood the significance of her skill set. Maya's concerns were validated the next morning when she discovered additional visitors waiting outside her apartment building. 2 men in conservative suits were sitting in a sedan with government license plates, their presence unmistakable to anyone familiar with federal surveillance techniques. Rather than approaching them directly, Maya used skills developed during years of operational work to observe them without being detected. Their positioning, equipment, and behavior patterns confirmed they were professional surveillance personnel, though whether they represented intelligence agencies, law enforcement, or other government entities wasn't immediately clear. The realization that she was now under observation forced Maya to confront the reality that her attempt to maintain a low profile had failed completely. Her shooting performance had created exactly the kind of attention she'd spent 2 years trying to avoid, and the consequences were beginning to manifest in ways that threatened the peaceful existence she'd constructed for herself. Over the following days, the surveillance presence became more obvious and persistent. Different teams, different vehicles, but constant observation that made it clear Maya's activities were being monitored by parties who considered her sufficiently interesting to justify significant resources. Maya's response was to alter her routine in ways designed to test the capabilities and intentions of those watching her. She varied her travel patterns, visited public spaces where surveillance would be difficult, and generally behaved like someone aware of being watched but not particularly concerned about it. The surveillance teams were professional and well-equipped, confirming that her watchers were government personnel rather than civilian investigators or private security. Their interest appeared to be observational rather than preparatory to any enforcement action, suggesting they were gathering information rather than preparing for arrest or confrontation. But Maya's operational training had taught her that surveillance was often the prelude to contact attempts, recruitment efforts, or other forms of official pressure. The government agents watching her were likely building profiles, assessing her lifestyle and relationships, and developing strategies for bringing her back into whatever world her skills had originally been developed to serve. The situation reached a turning point when Maya returned from her evening shooting practice to find Agent Wells waiting in her apartment. The intrusion was clearly intended to demonstrate capabilities and send messages about the futility of trying to maintain privacy from determined government interests. "How did you get in?" Maya asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Professional courtesy," Wells replied, making herself comfortable in Maya's single chair. "We need to talk more seriously about your situation." Maya remained standing, positioning herself for rapid movement if the conversation took a threatening turn. "My situation seems to involve being watched by people who can't take no for an answer," she said coldly. Wells had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "The surveillance wasn't my idea," she admitted, "but your shooting performance created interest at levels above my pay grade. People want to understand who you are and what you're capable of. And they can't simply accept that I'm a private citizen who enjoys recreational shooting," Maya said. "When private citizens demonstrate capabilities that suggest advanced military training, certain questions naturally arise," Wells replied. "Particularly when those citizens have no verifiable history of receiving such training through official channels." The implication was clear. Maya's skills suggested training that hadn't been provided by conventional military or law enforcement programs, raising questions about who had trained her and in what context. Her lack of official records made her background a puzzle that intelligence analysts felt compelled to solve. "What if I were to leave the area?" Maya asked. "Relocate somewhere else. Avoid any further shooting competitions or public demonstrations of marksmanship?" Wells shook her head. "It's too late for that. Your performance has been documented, analyzed, and reported through channels that don't forget. Moving would only confirm that you have something to hide and justify more intensive investigation." Maya understood the implicit threat in Wells's words. She had attracted attention that couldn't be dismissed through simple avoidance, and any attempt to disappear would likely trigger more aggressive pursuit by agencies that didn't accept mysteries in their operational environment. "So what are my options?" Maya asked, though her tone suggested she suspected the answer wouldn't be particularly appealing. Wells leaned forward, her demeanor becoming more serious and professional. "Cooperation," she said simply. "Work with us voluntarily, on terms that respect your concerns about operational deployment, and maintain some control over how your skills are utilized. And if I refuse, then other people, with less understanding of your concerns and less interest in accommodation, will become involved in resolving the questions your presence raises." The threat was diplomatically phrased but unmistakable. Maya could cooperate voluntarily under terms that offered some protection of her interests, or she could face investigation and potential coercion by agencies that would be less respectful of her preferences. Maya walked to her small kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, using the mundane activity to buy time for thought while maintaining the appearance of calm consideration. Her operational training had prepared her for situations where authorities attempted to leverage pressure for cooperation, but it had also taught her to recognize when resistance would be counterproductive. "What kind of cooperation are you talking about?" she asked finally. Wells pulled out a different folder from her briefcase, this one containing documents that appeared more formal and official than her previous materials. "Technical consulting," she said. "Analysis of shooting techniques, evaluation of training programs, development of precision marksmanship curricula for special operations personnel." Maya examined the documents without commitment, noting that they described positions that would indeed avoid direct operational deployment while utilizing her specialized knowledge. The assignments were academic and advisory rather than field-based, offering a compromise between her desire for peaceful civilian life and the government's interest in accessing her expertise. "These positions would be civilian contractor roles?" Maya asked, focusing on details that would affect her legal status and obligations. "Correct," Wells confirmed. "Department of Defense, civilian employees, subject to security clearance requirements and standard government employment regulations, but not military personnel subject to deployment orders or operational commands." The distinction was significant from Maya's perspective. Civilian contractor status would provide certain protections against being forced into operational roles, while still allowing her to contribute specialized knowledge in controlled environments. But Maya also understood that once she re-engaged with government agencies in any capacity, maintaining strict boundaries between advisory work and operational involvement would become increasingly difficult. Mission requirements had a way of expanding beyond initial parameters, particularly when rare capabilities were available to address urgent needs. "I need guarantees," Maya said finally. "Written agreements that clearly define the scope of any consulting work and explicitly prohibit operational deployment or field assignment of any kind." Wells nodded approvingly. "That can be arranged. The people I work for understand that forcing unwilling personnel into operational roles typically produces poor results. They're more interested in voluntary cooperation that maximizes the value of your expertise." Maya spent the next hour reviewing documents that outlined potential consulting arrangements, noting requirements, compensation, and most importantly, limitations on how her services could be utilized. The positions offered were indeed advisory and technical rather than operational, though they would require security clearances and periodic availability for government projects. "I'll need time to consider this," Maya said finally, though both women understood that her options were limited, and delaying wouldn't fundamentally change the situation she faced. Wells stood to leave, gathering her materials except for the folder containing the consulting opportunities. "Take whatever time you need," she said, "but understand that interest in your capabilities isn't going to disappear simply because you don't respond immediately." After Wells departed, Maya found herself facing a decision she'd hoped never to confront again. Her carefully constructed civilian life had been compromised by her own exceptional performance at a recreational shooting competition, and the attention she'd attracted wouldn't be dismissed through avoidance or denial. The government's interest in her skills was understandable from their perspective, but it represented a threat to the peace and anonymity she'd worked hard to establish after leaving her previous life. Re-engaging with official agencies in any capacity would mean accepting risks she'd hoped to leave behind permanently. But the alternative, continued surveillance, investigation, and potential coercion, offered even fewer appealing prospects. Maya had seen how government agencies dealt with individuals who possessed sensitive capabilities but refused cooperation, and the outcomes were rarely favorable for the non-cooperative parties. That night, Maya made her way to her private shooting range for what might be her final session of truly recreational marksmanship. As she worked through familiar exercises and engaged targets at various distances, she found herself reflecting on the path that had led her to this moment. Her exceptional shooting abilities hadn't been developed for competitive purposes or recreational enjoyment. They'd been learned under circumstances where precision meant survival, where missing targets resulted in consequences far more serious than poor scores or disappointed expectations. The skills that had made her remarkable at Pine Valley had been forged in environments where failure meant death for herself and others who depended on her capabilities. Maya's reluctance to return to any form of government service wasn't based on unwillingness to serve or contribute to important causes. It stemmed from painful knowledge of what such service ultimately required, and the personal costs it imposed on those who possessed rare and valuable capabilities. But as she worked through her shooting routine, Maya also confronted the reality that her skills represented knowledge and capabilities that could genuinely benefit others in ways that didn't necessarily require personal sacrifice. The consulting opportunities Wells had described offered possibilities for contributing expertise while maintaining protective boundaries around operational involvement. The decision Maya faced wasn't simply between cooperation and resistance, but between different forms of service and different levels of personal risk. Her experiences had taught her the costs of operational deployment, but they'd also demonstrated the value of specialized knowledge when applied appropriately to protect others. As dawn approached and Maya prepared to leave her private range, she'd reached a tentative decision about her response to the government's interest in her capabilities. The choice wasn't ideal, but it offered the best available compromise between her desire for peaceful existence and the reality of official attention that couldn't be avoided. Maya's shooting performance at Pine Valley had been intended as nothing more than recreational activity, but it had ultimately led to consequences she couldn't have anticipated or avoided. Her exceptional abilities had created obligations she'd hoped to escape, but they'd also provided opportunities to serve in ways that might prove more sustainable than her previous experiences. The consulting positions Wells had described represented a middle path between complete withdrawal from service and full operational re-engagement. They offered possibilities for contributing valuable expertise while maintaining some control over how that expertise would be utilized and what risks she would be required to accept. Maya understood that accepting any government position would mean stepping back into a world she'd worked hard to leave behind, but it would also mean doing so on terms that acknowledged her concerns and provided protections she hadn't possessed during her previous service. As she drove back toward town, Maya began mentally preparing for conversations that would determine how the rest of her life would unfold. The quiet retirement she'd constructed for herself was ending, but perhaps something better could be built from the compromise she was prepared to accept. Her exceptional marksmanship had attracted attention she hadn't sought, but it had also provided leverage for negotiating terms that might allow her to serve without sacrificing everything she'd learned was important during her years away from official duties. The government needed her skills, but they also needed her voluntary cooperation to make best use of those skills. Maya's decision to re-engage wouldn't be a return to her previous life, but rather a step toward a new form of service that balanced her capabilities with her hard-won understanding of what kinds of sacrifice were sustainable and what kinds were ultimately destructive. The sun was fully up by the time Maya reached her apartment, where Agent Wells was waiting with coffee and what appeared to be formal documentation for whatever arrangement they would negotiate. The conversation ahead would determine whether Maya's remarkable shooting abilities would be channeled toward purposes she could accept, or whether her attempt to maintain control over her own life would prove inadequate against official persistence. But as she prepared to engage in negotiations that would shape her future, Maya felt a sense of resolution that had been absent since her shooting performance had shattered the anonymity she'd carefully maintained. Her exceptional abilities came with obligations she couldn't avoid, but they also provided opportunities for service that might prove more meaningful than the isolation she'd imposed on herself. The compromise she was prepared to accept wouldn't restore the simple civilian life she'd constructed, but it might create something better, a way to contribute her rare and valuable skills while maintaining the boundaries and protections she'd learned were essential for sustainable service. Maya's marksmanship had revealed her presence to authorities who wouldn't accept her desire for anonymity, but it had also demonstrated capabilities that could be channeled toward genuinely important purposes. The challenge ahead would be ensuring that her re-engagement with official service occurred on terms that respected both her expertise and her hard-won understanding of what kinds of sacrifice were truly necessary. 2 weeks later, Maya found herself standing in the corridor of a nondescript government building outside Washington, D.C., reviewing documents that would formalize her return to federal service. The consulting agreement Wells had negotiated was more comprehensive than their initial discussions had suggested, but it maintained the fundamental protections Maya had insisted upon as conditions for her cooperation. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the program director who would oversee Maya's consulting work, emerged from her office to greet the newest member of their technical advisory team. Martinez's background combined academic credentials in applied ballistics with practical experience in military training development, making her uniquely qualified to appreciate the value Maya's expertise would bring to their programs. "Ms. Chen," Martinez said, extending her hand in greeting, "I've reviewed your performance documentation from Pine Valley. Quite remarkable shooting under any circumstances, but particularly impressive given your equipment limitations." Maya accepted the handshake while noting that Martinez's assessment focused on technical performance rather than speculation about her background, a professional approach that suggested their working relationship might prove more comfortable than her interactions with intelligence personnel. "I understand you'll be working on precision marksmanship curriculum development," Martinez continued, leading Maya into a conference room where several other team members were gathered. "We're particularly interested in techniques that produce consistent accuracy without requiring expensive specialized equipment." The focus on practical, cost-effective training methods aligned well with Maya's own understanding of marksmanship fundamentals. Her exceptional shooting had been achieved with basic equipment because her training had emphasized principles that transcended the capabilities of any particular rifle or scope configuration. "Equipment helps," Maya said as they settled around the conference table, "but it can't substitute for proper fundamentals. Too many programs focus on gear rather than skills." The observation sparked immediate interest from the other team members, who had been struggling with exactly that issue in their current training development efforts. Military budgets, while substantial, weren't unlimited, and developing effective marksmanship programs that could be implemented across large numbers of personnel required approaches that balanced performance with practical resource constraints. Dr. James Wilson, a former Marine instructor who now worked on training methodology, leaned forward with obvious interest. What would you consider the most important fundamentals that get overlooked in favor of equipment solutions? Maya considered the question carefully, drawing on years of experience teaching marksmanship to personnel who needed to achieve proficiency quickly and maintain it under challenging conditions. Breathing control and trigger management, she said finally. Everything else builds on those two foundations, but people get distracted by scope adjustments and rifle specifications instead of mastering basic shot execution. The discussion that followed demonstrated to Maya that her new colleagues possessed genuine expertise and practical understanding of the challenges involved in developing effective training programs. Their questions were informed and specific, focusing on implementation details rather than theoretical concepts. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, an Army officer on temporary assignment to the program, raised concerns about training time constraints. "We typically have limited windows for marksmanship instruction," she explained. "How do you prioritize fundamentals when time is severely restricted?" Maya's response drew on experiences that predated her official involvement with any government agency. "Start with dry fire practice," she said. "Trigger control and sight alignment can be developed without ammunition or range time. Build the muscle memory first, then validate it with live fire." The approach was practical and resource-efficient, addressing real-world constraints while focusing on techniques that would produce measurable improvements in shooting performance. Maya found herself appreciating the opportunity to share knowledge that could genuinely benefit others without the life-or-death pressures that had characterized her previous experiences. As the meeting progressed, Maya began to understand that her new position might offer genuine satisfaction without the personal cost she'd feared. Her colleagues were professionals who understood the importance of effective marksmanship training, but they were working in educational rather than operational contexts. The consulting work would involve developing training materials, reviewing instructional programs, and providing technical expertise for curriculum improvement, activities that utilized her specialized knowledge without requiring her to accept personal risk or responsibility for others' survival in dangerous situations. Dr. Martinez concluded the initial meeting by outlining Maya's immediate assignments and establishing schedules for her involvement in various ongoing projects. The work would be demanding but manageable, providing opportunities for meaningful contribution while respecting the boundaries Maya had insisted upon as conditions for her participation. "One more thing," Martinez said as the meeting broke up. "We're hosting a training demonstration next month for senior military leadership. They're evaluating proposals for upgraded marksmanship programs, and your expertise could be valuable in demonstrating the effectiveness of fundamentals-based approaches." Maya hesitated, understanding that public demonstrations were exactly the kind of high-visibility activities she'd hoped to avoid. "What kind of demonstration?" she asked carefully. "Nothing elaborate," Martinez assured her. "Just showing how proper technique can achieve excellent results with standard equipment. The kind of shooting you demonstrated at Pine Valley, but in a controlled environment where decision-makers can observe the practical applications." The request was reasonable from the program's perspective, but Maya remained cautious about activities that would increase her visibility within government and military circles. Her agreement to consult had been predicated on maintaining relatively low-profile involvement that wouldn't draw excessive attention to her capabilities or background. "I'll need details about who would be observing and what specific demonstrations would be required," Maya said finally, neither accepting nor declining the request. Martinez nodded understandingly. "Of course. I'll provide complete information about the event scope and attendance, and you can decide whether the demonstration fits within your comfort parameters." The professional respect Martinez demonstrated for Maya's concerns reinforced her initial positive impression of the working environment she was entering. Her new colleagues appeared to understand that effective consultation required voluntary cooperation, and that pushing beyond agreed boundaries would be counterproductive for everyone involved. Over the following weeks, Maya settled into a routine that proved more satisfying than she'd anticipated. Her consulting work involved reviewing existing training programs, developing improved instructional materials, and providing technical expertise for curriculum enhancement projects that would benefit large numbers of military and law enforcement personnel. The work utilized her specialized knowledge in ways that felt genuinely meaningful without requiring her to accept the personal risks and psychological burdens that had characterized her previous service. She was contributing to important programs that would improve the capabilities of others, but doing so from positions of safety and control that she'd learned to value above conventional measures of professional advancement. Maya's colleagues proved to be competent professionals who appreciated her expertise without excessive curiosity about its origins. Their focus remained on practical applications and measurable improvements to training effectiveness, rather than speculation about her background or the circumstances that had developed her remarkable abilities. The technical challenges of curriculum development provided intellectual stimulation that Maya found engaging and rewarding. Translating advanced marksmanship techniques into instructional materials that could be effectively implemented by training personnel with varying levels of experience required careful attention to pedagogical details and practical constraints. But as Maya's involvement in the program deepened and her contributions became more central to their development efforts, she began receiving requests for expanded participation that tested the boundaries she'd established as conditions for her cooperation. The demonstration Martinez had mentioned evolved into a more significant event than initially described, with attendance that included senior officials from multiple agencies and branches of service. The scope had expanded beyond simple technique demonstration to include comparative evaluations of different training approaches and equipment configurations. Maya found herself facing a familiar dilemma: requests for increased involvement that offered opportunities for greater contribution, but also threatened the protective anonymity she'd worked to maintain. Her consulting agreement provided legal protections against operational deployment, but it couldn't shield her from the career advancement opportunities and expanded responsibilities that typically accompanied demonstrated competence in government service. The tension between her desire to contribute meaningfully and her need to maintain protective boundaries would define Maya's ongoing relationship with her consulting role. Her exceptional abilities had created opportunities for service that she found genuinely rewarding, but they had also established expectations for continued involvement that might prove difficult to manage within the limits she'd set for herself. As Maya prepared for another day of curriculum development work, she reflected on the complexity of her situation. Her marksmanship demonstration at Pine Valley had seemed like harmless recreational activity, but it had ultimately led to consequences that were reshaping her entire life in ways she couldn't have anticipated. The consulting work she'd accepted as a compromise between complete withdrawal and operational re-engagement was proving more engaging and satisfying than she'd expected, but it was also creating pressures for expanded involvement that threatened to exceed the boundaries she'd established as essential for her well-being. Maya's challenge would be maintaining control over how her exceptional abilities were utilized, while contributing meaningfully to programs that could genuinely benefit from her expertise. The balance between service and self-protection remained delicate and would require constant attention to preserve the sustainable approach to contribution she was working to establish. The morning of the demonstration arrived with unseasonably warm weather and clear skies that would provide ideal conditions for precision shooting. Maya stood at the window of her hotel room overlooking the Quantico training facility where senior military officials from across the Department of Defense had gathered to evaluate proposals for enhanced marksmanship programs. Her initial reluctance about participating in such a high-profile event had been gradually overcome by Dr. Martinez's assurances about the controlled nature of the demonstration and its potential impact on training programs that could benefit thousands of service members. Still, Maya felt the familiar tension that came with exposing her capabilities to audiences who might draw conclusions beyond the intended scope of the presentation. The demonstration range had been configured to showcase different approaches to precision marksmanship training, with stations representing various equipment levels and training methodologies. Maya's contribution would focus on achieving exceptional accuracy with standard-issue equipment, contrasting with other presentations that emphasize technological solutions and specialized gear. General Patricia Hawkins, the commanding officer whose evaluation would largely determine which programs received funding and implementation, arrived early to review the demonstration setup. Her reputation for demanding practical solutions over theoretical concepts had influenced the entire event's organization, ensuring that all presentations would focus on measurable results rather than impressive-sounding proposals. Maya watched from the preparation area as General Hawkins examined each demonstration station with the critical eye of someone who understood the practical realities of military training programs. The general's questions to other presenters focused consistently on implementation costs, training time requirements, and performance outcomes under real-world conditions. Ms. Chen, drive. Martinez approached with final preparations for Maya's portion of the demonstration. General Hawkins is particularly interested in your fundamentals-based approach. Her staff has reviewed your Pine Valley performance documentation, and they're curious about replicating those results with standard military equipment. Maya nodded while continuing to prepare her rifle, the same well-worn weapon that had drawn so much attention at the civilian competition. She'd deliberately chosen to use identical equipment for the demonstration, wanting to emphasize that exceptional marksmanship resulted from technique rather than technological advantages. The first presentations focused on advanced optics systems and precision ammunition that could improve accuracy through technological enhancements. The results were impressive within their context, but Maya noted that the approaches required significant financial investment and specialized equipment that might not be practical for large-scale military implementation. Captain James Fletcher, representing a training program that emphasized equipment standardization, achieved respectable results with issued rifles and optics, demonstrating the baseline performance that current military marksmanship programs typically produced. His shooting was competent and professional, though not exceptional by competitive standards. Dr. Ellen Wright, an academic researcher from a prominent university, presented theoretical models for marksmanship improvement that incorporated biomechanical analysis and cognitive training techniques. Her presentation was intellectually impressive but lacked the practical demonstration component that characterized the other proposals. Maya's demonstration was scheduled last, providing her the opportunity to showcase fundamentals-based marksmanship after the audience had observed other approaches and their relative effectiveness. As she walked to the firing line, she was conscious of the intense scrutiny from officials whose decisions would affect training programs throughout the military. General Hawkins positioned herself where she could observe both Maya's shooting technique and her target results, clearly intending to assess not just the outcomes but the methods that produced them. The general's attention was focused and professional, suggesting someone genuinely interested in understanding how exceptional marksmanship could be achieved and replicated. Ms. Chen will be engaging targets at distances from 200 to 600 yards using standard M4 rifle configuration with issued optics, Dr. Martinez announced to the assembled observers. Her approach emphasizes fundamental shooting principles that can be taught and implemented without specialized equipment or extensive training time. Maya settled into her shooting position with the methodical precision that had characterized her performance at Pine Valley, conscious that every movement was being analyzed by experts who understood the technical aspects of precision marksmanship. Her setup was deliberately simple: standard rifle, basic scope, conventional ammunition that represented typical military specifications. The first target, positioned at 200 yards, presented a straightforward challenge that would establish baseline capability before progressing to more demanding distances. Maya's initial shots demonstrated the mechanical precision that had impressed civilian competitors, each bullet finding the center ring with consistency that made accurate shooting appear effortless. General Hawkins moved closer to observe Maya's shooting technique, noting details that weren't immediately apparent to casual observers. Maya's breathing pattern, trigger control, and follow-through displayed technical proficiency that clearly resulted from extensive training and practice under demanding conditions. Consistent sight picture, the general murmured to her aide, noting aspects of Maya's technique that distinguished her approach from conventional military marksmanship training. Natural point of aim, no fighting the rifle. She's making this look easier than it should be. As the demonstration progressed to longer distances, Maya's performance maintained the same standard of excellence that had characterized her civilian competition shooting. The 400-yard targets fell to her shots with the same mechanical precision she'd displayed at closer ranges, each bullet placement confirming that distance alone wouldn't challenge her capabilities. But it was Maya's approach to environmental factors that most impressed the military observers. Wind conditions at the range were variable and challenging, requiring constant adjustment and compensation that tested even experienced marksmen. Maya's response to these conditions appeared almost intuitive, her shots consistently finding their marks despite environmental factors that complicated accuracy for other shooters. Colonel David Morrison, whose special operations background provided insight into advanced marksmanship applications, found himself studying Maya's technique with professional fascination. "She's not calculating wind compensation," he observed to General Hawkins. "She's reading conditions and adjusting instinctively. That's not something you develop in typical training environments." The 600-yard portion of Maya's demonstration provided the most compelling evidence of her exceptional capabilities. At this distance, environmental factors became critical, equipment limitations more apparent, and shooting technique absolutely crucial for consistent accuracy. Most military personnel would consider 600-yard precision with standard equipment to be extremely challenging under ideal conditions. Maya engaged the distant targets with the same fluid confidence she'd displayed throughout the demonstration, her shots impacting with precision that exceeded what the observers had expected from standard military equipment. Each bullet placement confirmed that her exceptional performance wasn't dependent on specialized gear, but rather on technique and training that transcended equipment limitations. "How?" General Hawkins asked Dr. Martinez quietly. "How is she achieving that level of precision with equipment that shouldn't be capable of those results?" Dr. Martinez had anticipated the question and prepared her response carefully. "Fundamental shooting principles applied with exceptional consistency," she explained. "Miss Chen's technique eliminates most of the human error factors that limit accuracy for typical shooters. She's maximizing the inherent precision of standard equipment through superior marksmanship fundamentals." The explanation was technically accurate but didn't address the deeper questions about where Maya had developed such exceptional abilities or under what circumstances her training had occurred. General Hawkins understood that some questions weren't appropriate for public forums, but her interest in Maya's background was clearly more than casual professional curiosity. As Maya's formal demonstration concluded, General Hawkins approached the firing line to examine her target results directly. The pattern of bullet holes confirmed what the observers had witnessed: precision that rivaled anything achieved with specialized equipment, accomplished using standard military rifles and optics. "Outstanding shooting," the general said to Maya directly. "Could you walk me through your approach to developing this level of marksmanship? Specifically, how would you translate your techniques into training programs for large numbers of personnel?" Maya had prepared for questions about training methodology, understanding that the demonstration's real purpose was evaluating approaches that could be implemented broadly rather than showcasing individual exceptional performance. "Focus on dry-fire practice for trigger control and sight alignment," she said. "Most accuracy problems result from inconsistent fundamentals rather than equipment limitations." General Hawkins nodded approvingly. "Time requirements for achieving competency?" "Depends on the baseline," Maya replied. "But significant improvement is possible within standard training cycles if the focus remains on fundamentals rather than advanced techniques or specialized equipment." The conversation continued with increasingly specific questions about implementation details, training progression, and performance standards that could be realistically achieved by typical military personnel. Maya's responses demonstrated not just exceptional personal shooting ability, but genuine understanding of how marksmanship skills could be effectively taught and developed in institutional settings. Colonel Morrison joined the discussion with questions that revealed his special operations background. "Combat applications?" he asked, using terminology that suggested interest in marksmanship training that went beyond standard military requirements. Maya's response was carefully measured. "The fundamentals are the same regardless of application," she said. "Precision shooting under pressure requires the same basic skills, just applied in different contexts." The answer was diplomatically evasive, but professionally appropriate, acknowledging Morrison's question without providing details that might compromise operational security or reveal information about her own background. General Hawkins noted the careful phrasing and filed it away as additional evidence supporting her growing suspicions about Maya's experience level. As the demonstration concluded and officials began departing for their evaluation discussions, Martinez approached Maya with obvious satisfaction about how the presentation had progressed. "Excellent work," she said. "General Hawkins was clearly impressed, both with your shooting and your understanding of training implementation challenges." Maya began cleaning her rifle with the methodical attention that characterized all her equipment maintenance, though she remained aware of continuing observation from several officials who hadn't yet departed. "Any sense of how the evaluation will proceed?" she asked. "Positive initial reactions," Martinez replied. "But the real decisions will be made during closed-door budget discussions over the next few weeks. Your demonstration provided compelling evidence that exceptional results are possible with our approach, but military procurement involves factors beyond pure performance considerations." Over the following days, Maya returned to her routine consulting work while awaiting word about the demonstration's impact on program funding decisions. Her colleagues reported positive feedback from officials who had observed her shooting, but the formal evaluation process would take time and involve considerations beyond the technical merits of different training approaches. The waiting period provided Maya with time to reflect on her evolving relationship with government service and the unexpected satisfaction she'd found in contributing to training programs that could benefit others. Her initial reluctance about accepting consulting work had been based on concerns about being drawn back into operational roles, but the reality of her position had proven more manageable and rewarding than she'd anticipated. 2 weeks after the demonstration, Dr. Martinez called Maya into her office with news about the evaluation results. "Funding approved," she announced with obvious pleasure. "General Hawkins' recommendation carried significant weight, and your demonstration was specifically cited as evidence supporting the effectiveness of fundamentals-based training approaches." Maya felt genuine satisfaction at the news, understanding that the approved funding would enable development of training programs that could improve marksmanship capabilities for thousands of military personnel. Her contribution had helped achieve something genuinely meaningful, while maintaining the protective boundaries she'd established as conditions for her participation. "There's more," Martinez continued. "General Hawkins has requested that you be assigned as the primary technical consultant for program implementation. She wants your direct involvement in developing training protocols and instructor certification standards." The expanded role represented both opportunity and challenge for Maya. Greater involvement would provide more influence over how the training programs were designed and implemented, ensuring that her vision of fundamentals-based marksmanship was accurately translated into institutional curricula. But it would also increase her visibility within military circles and potentially expose her to requests for involvement beyond her agreed consulting parameters. "What would the expanded role involve specifically?" Maya asked, needing to understand the scope of additional responsibilities before making any commitments. Martinez outlined a position that would include curriculum development, instructor training, program evaluation, and ongoing technical support for implementation across multiple military installations. The work would be demanding, but would remain within the advisory and educational contexts that Maya had accepted as appropriate for her skills and background. "Travel requirements?" Maya asked, understanding that multi-installation implementation would likely require her presence at various training facilities. "Moderate," Martinez replied. "Primarily for instructor certification and program launch events. Most of the development work can be accomplished here, with periodic field visits to ensure proper implementation." Maya considered the proposal carefully, weighing the opportunity to have greater impact on training programs against the increased exposure and responsibility that the expanded role would entail. Her consulting work had proven more satisfying than expected, and the chance to shape marksmanship training for the entire military represented a significant opportunity for meaningful contribution. "I'll accept the expanded role," Maya said finally, with the understanding that it remains advisory and technical rather than operational in nature. Martinez smiled and extended her hand in congratulation. "Welcome to the senior consulting team," she said. "Your expertise is going to make a real difference in how we prepare our people for the challenges they face." Over the following months, Maya found herself increasingly engaged in work that utilized her specialized knowledge while providing genuine satisfaction through meaningful contribution to military preparedness. Her role in developing training programs allowed her to shape how thousands of service members would learn marksmanship fundamentals, potentially improving their effectiveness and survivability in operational environments. The consulting work also provided Maya with colleagues who appreciated her expertise without excessive curiosity about its origins. Her technical contributions were valued for their practical effectiveness rather than their implications about her background. Allowing her to maintain the protective privacy she'd learned was essential for sustainable service. As Maya's involvement in the program deepened, she began receiving recognition that acknowledged her contributions while respecting her preference for avoiding high-profile attention. Her name appeared on technical publications and training materials, but always in contexts that emphasized her civilian contractor status rather than suggesting operational experience. The balance Maya had achieved between meaningful service and personal protection represented a sustainable approach to utilizing her exceptional abilities without accepting the risks and sacrifices that had characterized her previous experiences. Her marksmanship demonstration at Pine Valley had ultimately led to consequences she couldn't have anticipated, but those consequences had evolved into opportunities for contribution that proved more rewarding than the anonymous retirement she'd originally sought. General Hawkins, whose evaluation had been crucial to the program's approval and Maya's expanded role, requested a private meeting 6 months after the initial demonstration. The general's interest in Maya's background hadn't diminished, but her approach had evolved from investigation to professional respect based on observed competence and contribution. "Your training programs are exceeding performance expectations across all implementation sites," General Hawkins told Maya during their meeting. Marksmanship scores have improved significantly, and instructor feedback has been uniformly positive. Maya accepted the compliment while noting that General Hawkins' praise focused on measurable results rather than speculation about her personal qualifications. The professional approach reinforced Maya's confidence that her consulting role could continue without compromise to the protective boundaries she'd established. "There's something else I wanted to discuss," the general continued. "We're developing advanced training programs for special operations personnel who face particularly challenging marksmanship requirements. Your expertise could be valuable for that level of instruction." The suggestion represented exactly the kind of expansion Maya had anticipated might emerge as her consulting work proved successful. Special operations training would involve personnel and applications that approached the operational contexts she'd sought to avoid, though the work would remain educational rather than directly operational. "What would be required?" Maya asked, neither accepting nor declining the suggestion while gathering information about what such involvement might entail. General Hawkins outlined programs that would focus on advanced marksmanship techniques for personnel whose missions required precision shooting under extreme conditions. The training would be more intensive and specialized than standard military marksmanship programs, but it would remain within educational contexts rather than operational deployment. The difference would be in the level of performance required and the complexity of scenarios addressed, the general explained. But the fundamental approach, teaching principles rather than depending on equipment solutions, would remain the same. Maya understood that the proposed expansion would test the boundaries she'd established, while offering opportunities for contribution that aligned with her expertise and experience. Special operations personnel faced challenges that standard military training didn't adequately address, and her knowledge could genuinely improve their capabilities and survivability. But Maya also recognized that working with special operations personnel would expose her to individuals whose own backgrounds and experience might lead to questions about her qualifications that went beyond her civilian contractor credentials. The community of advanced marksmanship experts was small and interconnected, and her exceptional abilities would inevitably draw attention from people capable of recognizing their significance. "I need to consider the proposal carefully," Maya said finally. "The expanded scope raises questions about maintaining appropriate boundaries between advisory and operational involvement." General Hawkins nodded understandingly. "Take whatever time you need," she said. "But understand that opportunities to contribute at this level don't arise frequently, and your unique qualifications make you particularly valuable for these applications." As Maya left the meeting, she found herself facing another decision point about the extent of her re-engagement with government service. Her consulting work had proven more satisfying than expected, and the opportunity to contribute to special operations training represented a chance for even greater impact on military preparedness and effectiveness. But the proposed expansion also represented movement toward the kinds of high-stakes training and operational preparation that had characterized her previous experiences. The boundary between teaching advanced marksmanship and preparing for operational deployment was subtle but significant, and maintaining that distinction would require constant vigilance. Maya's exceptional shooting abilities had created opportunities for service that she found genuinely meaningful, but they had also established expectations for continued involvement that challenged the protective limits she'd established as essential for sustainable contribution. The ongoing tension between her desire to serve and her need for personal protection would define her approach to the advanced training opportunities General Hawkins had proposed. That evening, Maya returned to her private shooting range for the first time in weeks, using familiar exercises to clear her mind and consider her options. The methodical precision of her practice routine provided a meditation that helped her process the complex decisions she faced about her future involvement in government service. As she worked through challenging shooting scenarios that replicated the kind of advanced training she'd been asked to develop for others, Maya found herself acknowledging that her exceptional abilities came with responsibilities she couldn't entirely avoid. Her knowledge and skills could genuinely benefit others who faced dangerous situations, and withholding that contribution for purely personal reasons felt increasingly difficult to justify. But Maya also understood that accepting expanded responsibilities would require careful management to avoid the mission creep that had compromised her previous service. The consulting arrangement that had proven sustainable depended on maintaining clear boundaries between advisory work and operational involvement, and those boundaries would become more challenging to preserve as her contributions became more central to mission-critical training. Maya's decision about General Hawkins's proposal would determine whether her re-engagement with government service remained a manageable compromise, or evolved into something that approached the all-consuming commitment she'd worked to escape. Her exceptional marksmanship had provided opportunities for meaningful contribution, but it had also created expectations that tested her ability to maintain control over how her talents were utilized. As she completed her practice session and prepared to leave the range, Maya had reached a tentative decision about the Special Operations training proposal. The opportunity represented both risk and reward, challenging her protective boundaries while offering possibilities for contribution that aligned with her deepest convictions about service and responsibility. The path forward would require careful negotiation to ensure that expanded involvement occurred on terms that preserved her autonomy, while maximizing her contribution to programs that could genuinely benefit from her expertise. Maya's exceptional abilities had attracted attention she hadn't sought, but they had also provided leverage for shaping the terms of her service in ways that previous generations of experts hadn't been able to achieve. Her marksmanship demonstration at Pine Valley had been intended as recreational activity, but it had ultimately led to opportunities for service that proved more rewarding than the anonymous retirement she'd originally planned. The consulting work she'd accepted as a compromise had evolved into genuine contribution that utilized her talents while respecting her need for protective boundaries. Maya's future involvement in special operations training would represent another step in the evolution of her relationship with government service, testing her ability to maintain sustainable contribution while avoiding the destructive patterns that had characterized her previous experiences. The challenge would be ensuring that her expanded role enhanced rather than compromised the balance she'd worked to establish between meaningful service and personal protection. As Maya drove away from her practice range, she felt cautiously optimistic about her ability to navigate the challenges ahead while maintaining the hard-won stability she'd achieved through careful boundary management and principled compromise. Her exceptional shooting abilities had created obligations she couldn't avoid, but they had also provided opportunities for service that honored both her skills and her understanding of sustainable contribution. The next phase of Maya's involvement in government consulting would test whether the protective framework she'd established could accommodate expanded responsibilities while preserving the personal autonomy that made such service possible. Her journey from anonymous retirement through reluctant consultation to meaningful contribution had demonstrated that exceptional abilities could be channeled toward positive purposes without requiring total sacrifice of personal interests. Maya's story represented the possibility that government service could be structured to respect individual boundaries while maximizing the contribution of rare and valuable capabilities. Her marksmanship had revealed her presence to authorities who demanded explanation, but it had also provided leverage for negotiating terms that balanced institutional needs with personal sustainability. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.